As the F1 circus rolls into Bahrain, the paddock is abuzz with whispers of a resurgence of the Silver Arrows with their newly improved W15. Mercedes, traditionally seen as the chaser in recent times, especially behind the towering might of Red Bull and the pace of Ferrari, seems to have something up their sleeve that could potentially shake up the leaderboard. Despite setting the stage with modest expectations, there's a growing sense that the German team might just have found their lost edge. Naomi Schiff of Sky Sports had some interesting insights about the mood of the paddock after pre-season testing last week. The long run from Lewis Hamilton has a few people in the paddock talking. Their race pace looks promising. Obviously, Ferrari's was as well. That has been their Achilles heel, and it looks like they've turned that around. There is more coming from Mercedes than they've managed to show. There were secret nuggets that I've heard quite a few people in the paddock talking about. Mercedes' journey through the ground effect era has been challenging, to say the least. They've come up with some interesting concepts, but the execution and results haven't been what they expected, keeping them a step behind Red Bull. With the introduction of the W15, Mercedes seems to have turned a new leaf, drawing inspiration from Red Bull's RB19 design, but also introducing their own unique innovations, particularly at the front of the car with the front wing and suspension. Ted Kravitz from Sky Sports F1 is particularly intrigued by these new concepts. He's been following the team's evolution closely, from their third-place constructors' finish in 2022 to a more competitive stance last season, despite the challenges posed by their zero-pod aerodynamic approach. Kravitz's comments about the front suspension and the adjustable wishbone show us the potential of this innovative approach. In a Sky Sports F1 Q&A, he wrote, "It's great," he wrote. "A relatively quick change from what seems to be a regular amount of anti-dive to a massive amount of anti-dive is a useful thing to have. But I'd be absolutely astonished if they changed it in the middle of a race weekend. I think it's the kind of thing where they know the circuit they're going to, let's say one where cars struggle to protect their front tires such as Hungary or Abu Dhabi. They'd know where they'd want that particular suspension geometry and they'd bring the car with it already fitted. But it's nice to know that they can change it quite quickly. This season, Mercedes has made a clear departure from previous designs, with Toto Wolff acknowledging a move away from the zero-pod concept towards a more traditional yet innovative approach. The team's new front wing, featuring a unique connection using a carbon fiber wire, has already stirred discussions about its legality and aerodynamic implications. But there are some doubters in the paddock as well, like Damon Hill. The former F1 driver has been keeping an eye on Mercedes' prep for this season and reckons they've got their work cut out for them, especially when stacked against Ferrari's promising SF24. "I think Ferrari are more comfortable, more competitive," Hill said. "I think you'd have heard more positive noises coming out of Mercedes than we have done if they really thought that they'd nailed it. It's okay getting rid of a spiteful rear end, that's one thing. But you have to see performance. I thought the Mercedes looked very difficult to drive, looking at some of the laps in testing. It seemed a rough ride, and it has seemed like that for a long time, whereas the Ferrari looked subtle. It might be born out of its race run pace. It normally means a car is looking after its tyres." George Russell, fresh from his stint on the track last week, shared his thoughts about Mercedes's the W15 ahead of the season's first race in Bahrain. "I would say this year's car is a totally different race car," he replied, "to the point that the things we learned from last year in the way we were setting the car up, we will need to approach it differently this year. So there's a lot to learn about this, and it feels much closer to how a race car should feel, but the one area that we need to continue to work on is probably the bouncing that we're seeing. We got caught up with a bit of bouncing in testing last week. We were pushing the car really aggressively, but as I said, we're dealing with a totally different beast this year, whereas 2022, 2023, they were both cut from the same cloth." The bouncing that Russell mentioned isn't the notorious porpoising from 2022, but something more akin to braking stability, challenges they faced during testing. It's part of pushing the car to its limits, exploring what it can handle. Russell believes that Mercedes is still pushing the boundaries and exploiting the limitations of the car. He added, "That's what testing is for. I'd like to think you'll be seeing much less of that this weekend." So, 3 years on from the start of the new ground effect era, I think a lot of teams can still enter this circuit and set the car up in a too low and aggressive manner. but it's always a fine line because that's where the downforce is. He was also candid about some areas where the car could still make improvements, saying, "I'm confident the development slope of this car should be greater than we've seen in the past two cars because we've got a better platform," he said. "But it's just outright performance where the car is lacking. The car is feeling nice to drive, it's feeling good to drive, but we're just lacking downforce." The young British driver has been brimming with optimism for the Mercedes W15, touting it as having the most development potential he's seen during his tenure with the team. His excitement over the potential of the new car is understandable, considering that he'll be the new face of Mercedes in the Hamilton-Ferrari era starting next year. Despite Mercedes' dominant streak in the hybrid era, their fortunes have dipped with the advent of the new regulations, managing just a single win in the last two seasons. Russell's own victory in Brazil in 2022. Russell reflected on the journey and on the feeling of the new car, saying, "I'm confident the development slope of this car should be greater than we've seen over the past two cars because we've got a better platform," Russell said. "But it is just outright performance. You know the car's feeling nice to drive, you're feeling good to drive, but we're just lacking downforce coming." Russell, who almost clinched a win at the 2020 Sakir GP, has had a rollercoaster ride since his move from Williams to Mercedes. The reality of the past seasons has been a rather humbling experience for the 26-year-old. But this year, there's a palpable shift in spirits within the team. Russell noted a stark contrast to the previous year's morale, stating, "I think last year the morale was really quite low at this point," Russell added. "There'd been so much work across the winter, we arrived and had a car that wasn't performing anything close to what we expected, not just in terms of lap time, but in terms of the characteristics that the car faced. Now, we've put a lot of work over this winter and the car is performing as we would expect in terms of the way it's driving. We just need to make it faster now. So it's always the stopwatch that counts, but at least the simulator is correlating well. The work we've done has worked as we've expected. We just need to make the car faster." The current face of Mercedes and seven-time world champion Lewis Hamilton too has weighed in on his opinions about the W15. Like his teammate, Hamilton also feels that this new direction offers the team a more solid foundation compared to its predecessors. "We know we've got work to do and we're not yet where we want to be. We have a better platform to work off from this year," he said of the W15. "We still have some problems that we're having to work through and it's not perfect. But it's definitely a better starting place from the past 2 years. So we are relatively happy in that respect. We're not where we want to be, competing with these guys, Red Bull and Ferrari at the front, but we'll work towards it." So what do you guys think about the new updates on the W15? Do you feel that the Silver Arrows have a chance at disrupting the pecking order, or will we see another season of Red Bull dominance? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Leave a like and subscribe if you want to stay up to date with the latest F1 news.